I'm going to go ahead and get right into my text this morning, which is Matthew's account of the time surrounding the birth of Christ. And so I'm going to read Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 18. It says, "Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of King Herod, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, 'Where is he who is born, King of the Jews? For we saw his star in the east and have come to worship him.' When King Herod heard it, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And gathering together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he asked them where the Christ would be born. And they said to him, 'In Bethlehem of Judea, for this is written through the prophet, You, Bethlehem, land of Judah, are in no way least among the princes of Judah. For out of you shall come a governor who shall shepherd my people Israel.' Then Herod secretly called the wise men and learned from them exactly what time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, 'Go and search diligently for the young child, and when you have found him, bring me word, so that I also may come and worship him.' They, having heard the king, went their way, and behold, the star, which they saw in the east, went before them until it came and stood over where the young child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceedingly great joy. And they came into the house and saw the young child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and worshipped him, opening their treasures, and they offered to him gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they went back to their own country another way. Now when they had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, 'Arise and take the young child and his mother, and flee into Egypt, and stay there until I tell you, for Herod will seek the young child to destroy him.' And he arose and took the young child and his mother by night, and departed into Egypt, and was there until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the Lord through the prophet, saying, 'Out of Egypt I called my son.' And then Herod, when he saw that he was mocked by the wise men, was exceedingly angry, and sent out and killed all the male children who were in Bethlehem and all the surrounding countryside from 2 years old and under, according to the exact time which he had learned from the wise men. Then that which was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled, saying, 'A voice was heard in Ramah, lamentation, weeping, and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and she wouldn't be comforted, because they are no more.'" Now I want to start by sharing a story with you this morning about a man that I knew back in Zanesville, Ohio, who was diagnosed with brain cancer in May of 2020. And I had visited this man regularly and tried to stay in contact with his wife on a daily basis as this disease was progressing for health updates, because they were a very dear couple to me. I really enjoyed this man's company. And about a week before that, or before Christmas that year, this was back in 2020, she got the news. I remember her calling to tell me that the doctors had signaled that they believed that he was most likely going to be gone before the holiday. And he did. He passed away actually just a few days before Christmas. And you know, I want to point out something here. Even as a preacher, sometimes because we stand up and we do the funerals and we do these different types of things, people think we're kind of immune to emotions of losing someone that we love. And in fact, in the last 2.5 years at Minerva, I counted it up. I did 25 funerals in that time period. That was quite a lot. And I want to let you know that it still hurt. I'm still human to think about what this guy was going through. But this man in particular has left an impression on me that I'm never going to forget in my life, and that's why I'm bringing him up today, and that's also why I'm sharing this story, which I think is pertinent to what I'm talking about. And I want to tell you a little bit about this guy prior to this diagnosis, prior to him passing away. Now, he grew up with parents that found it almost impossible to say the words, "I love you." There was no affection. There wasn't any positive emotion. In fact, his very own parents did not even make the effort to come to his wedding. And the reason why they didn't come to his wedding was because there was a denominational difference. He was marrying a girl that belonged to a different denomination than what they went to. And his mother in particular was very verbally abusive to him in his childhood. And let's just say that things did not get any better when he became an adult. In fact, she even tried to insert her way into breaking up their marriage at one point. And yet, even after all of this guy in particular was one of the kindest, most genuine, most humble, beautiful men that you'd ever meet in your life. Never knew a stranger. Come up and shake anybody's hand and talk to anybody freely. And although he had never been a writer in his life, he said he never enjoyed writing whatsoever. When he was told that he was terminal, he decided that he was going to start keeping a journal. And he told me that the reason why he did this was because his emotions were so scattered from the minute that he got the diagnosis, and they were all over the place, that he just wanted to try to be able to find a way to even understand them himself by putting them down on paper, hoping he could go back and read and kind of see what he was trying to think. And on one of my last visits to go see him while he was still alive, he handed me that journal, and I read one of the final thoughts that this man ever put to paper. Now, to give some more background here, before I tell you what he wrote, he was in his 70s during this time, but his mother, who was in her 90s, and she was still alive at the time, she was living in New York City. Again, he lived in Ohio. And just about a month prior to his passing, he detailed in this journal about how he had finally had enough courage to call up his mom, this woman that he did not have a great relationship with, and to tell her that he was going to die. So she had no knowledge of what was going on until just about a month before. And I'm paraphrasing here, but this is basically what he wrote in that journal. He said, "I finally called Mom today and told her that I was dying. She immediately started apologizing for all of the terrible things that she had done to me over the years. And the truth of the matter is, she was very verbally abusive to me my entire life." Then he wrote, "However, she lived through the horrors of the Holocaust." They had come over from Europe. "As well as experiencing other major hardships during her childhood in Europe that I will have never had to deal with." And then he wrote at the end of this entry in all capital letters, "There is nothing to forgive." Now, when I read that, I actually almost burst into tears right there in this man's living room. And the reason why is this man, if we were to look at him, he had a very painful life. As I already told you, he was rejected emotionally by his parents. He was never good enough for his own mother. He was talked down to at every opportunity by her his entire life. And now here he was actively dying of a cancer that is really not pleasant to experience. Not that any cancer is, but he had a really nasty one. Yet one of his last acts through all of this darkness that was surrounding him from his family was to not only reach out to this very woman that had caused him the most pain in this life, but to also wipe the slate clean with her entirely, to forgive her, to wash it all away as if it never happened, to grant her something that she did not deserve or even try to earn. Grace. And it didn't change his circumstances. That's what I want us to understand. His life here still came to an end, and his ending was very dark and depressing, almost as his beginning and his childhood was. But in the midst of all of that darkness, a bright light was shown for somebody else. And the forces of evil could not drown out the sound of his reconciliation, his love, and his grace. Now, what I'm trying to say is that man, in one short phone call, lived a better sermon than I could ever try to preach in 100 years. And that is the goal of this faith. That man, in this closing season of his life, he's given us all the great analogy of the closing season of each year, which we call Christmas. And I mean the true meaning of Christmas. I'm not talking about a specific date on a calendar. I'm not talking about the presents. I'm not talking about Santa Claus, trees, eggnog, wreaths, beautiful drive-through Christmas displays, or even parties. I am talking about the story of the light and love of God piercing through the darkness of this very dreary world. Now, Isaiah spoke about it 700 years before it ever took place, when he said, "The people that walked in darkness have seen a great light. They that dwell in the land of the shadow of death, upon them hath the light shined." You see, we get Christmas all wrong in our modern, twisted, commercialized version that we celebrate and promote today. In fact, when we think of Christmas, we kind of get this Norman Rockwell painting in our heads of what it should look like. And we'll go to the store and we'll buy Christmas cards to send out. We'll have the most beautiful manger scenes that you could ever see on the front of them. Many times they'll just be in this wood structure, which if you actually go over there and look at where Jesus was born, he was born in a cave. That's where they kept the sheep during that time in Bethlehem. And it wasn't a very nice looking place, but in these pictures there's Joseph. He's in the finest robe, and he's looking down kind of regally at his beautiful wife, and not a hair on her head is out of place. But I want to remind you that she just gave birth to a baby. And I remember when that happened with my wife and with the babies. That's not what it looks like. It's a very different picture. In fact, I felt like I needed to sleep with one eye open that night because Shelley was a little on edge after that was over with. It's not a pretty picture when it comes to those types of things. But yet here's Mary. She's looking like she could be a model, and usually in these pictures, and she's holding the cleanest looking newborn baby that you've ever seen. Well, again, I've seen a baby be born in a hospital setting where they can easily clean them up, and it's not a clean looking experience. But he's wrapped in this crisp white blanket, and usually he's depicted with a glow around his head. And all around them, you got these immaculate and beautiful animals that are all just kind of staring adoringly at the Son of God. I bet it stunk in that room. It was not sanitary. Jesus was wrapped in swaddling clothes. That's just strips of cloth. But we think, if we could just have a Christmas that was as peaceful as that night that Jesus was born. But again, I've got news for us. The circumstances surrounding the birth of Christ were far from peaceful. In fact, things were downright dark for a very long period of time. I read it to you today. The lives of Mary and Joseph were totally upended. This was something that didn't all just happen on one day. Joseph had to leave. The wise men came. All of these things that were going on, and most of them were dark things that were going on in the world. First of all, Jesus was born in that cave that I talked about. He was placed in a manger because his parents had been forced by the government to be in a town that they probably didn't want to be in, to be enrolled or register for a tax they probably couldn't afford to pay. And then Mary gives birth to her son in this filth because all of the hotels are full, the Bible tells us, if we go to Luke's gospel, and nobody would take them in for the night. And on top of all of that, here come these three wise men searching for this new king that had been prophesied of for centuries. And they inadvertently get Herod all worked up and jealous and nervous because he's been placed as king of Judea by the Romans. And so to protect his own power and his own legacy, he orders the slaughter of innocents in Bethlehem, all males 2 years old and under, according to the time given by the Magi. Now, I want you to put yourself in the shoes of those parents for just a moment. Imagine this Christmas, you're snuggled up, or any night, you're snuggled up next to your family, and you're not causing any harm to anyone. You're just trying to enjoy the ones that you love. And then all of a sudden, the military bursts through your front door, and they murder your 2-year-old right in front of your very eyes, or your newborn baby. But that was the reality of the darkness of this world when Christ was brought into it. And even the family of Christ was affected. The text that I read to you this morning tells us that on top of all of the other inconveniences that they had already gone through, that an angel came to Joseph in a dream and told him to flee into Egypt, a foreign nation, in order to save his newborn son's life. You see, there was nothing pleasant or peaceful in the world during that period. But yet, in the midst of all of the darkness, the Bible tells us that the great light of the world, the Son of God, Jesus Christ, came to show us the way. In the middle of the hopelessness of this world, God brought forth a miracle. Now, going back to my friend that I told you about earlier for just a moment. When I mentioned his story, you, like I, probably, I'm going to guess, had a lot of pity for him. I mean, the guy had been through quite a bit, and not only was he dying, but it was happening at Christmas time. But I'm also willing to speculate that at the way that I described his mother, if you felt any emotion toward her at all, it might have even been anger, or maybe disbelief. Maybe it could have even brought back anger of your father or mother if you had a bad experience, or of someone else's or someone that you know. And that's the natural human way of thought when we hear about people like that. I mean, when my friend's wife talked about her mother-in-law to me, even I at the time saw her in my mind's eye as having a red suit with a pitchfork. She just seemed evil. But my friend, who was probably her biggest victim, and definitely her most frequent target, looked past his own pain for a minute. And he saw a woman that had been hardened by the darkness of this world that she had experienced. And even though he finally had this chance to let her have it for all of those years of torment, and I mean, it was the perfect opportunity. She was already feeling bad. She was apologizing. She had remorse, and he could have just let her have it and felt great about it and then died. But instead, he humbled himself and he offered her grace. A woman who had been hardened by the coldness of this world all around her felt the warmth of an act of love, even though she most certainly did not deserve it. Now, that is Christmas, and what I mean by that is what we are celebrating. The light coming into this world, because that is Christ, and that is what the Bible says that God has done for us. Jesus said in John chapter 3, verse 17, "For God did not send his Son into the world to judge the world, but that the world should be saved through him," because they were already judged, indicating that Christ never had to point his finger in judgment once. Again, why? Because the world already had no hope. There was nothing for mankind to cling to as things stood. The world was already totally condemned. The only thing that could save it was undeserved grace. And you know, for centuries, people have debated this question. They ask, how could a loving God, if God is so loving, how could he allow all this evil that we see in this world around us? They ask questions like, how could your friend die of cancer at Christmas if God is a good God? But you know, those questions don't trouble me anymore, and I'm going to tell you why. Because according to the Bible, God has given us a choice. Every last one of us. Now, you're probably expecting me to go into a rant about Adam and Eve and how they messed everything up for us and how it's all their fault, but I want you to listen to me this morning because I'm actually not going to do that. The truth of the matter is, and I think this is what we need to understand, is I am just as guilty of every atrocity that we see going on in the world today as Adam was. It's just as much my fault that people go through all of the things that they go through, that there's murder or things like that, as it was Eve's, or that there's disease that goes on in this world. I'm guilty of things like the breakup of the family. I'm the reason that our country and our world is in a mess today. I'm guilty and I'm deserving of death, and I'm going to tell you why. Because many times in the past, and even since coming to Christ, I still choose my way sometimes over God's. And one of those two ways leads to peace, and the other leads to the chaos that we see. And that's what Eden was all about, God's way versus our way. But that's also what our lives are all about as well. God still gives you the choice. The true moral law versus our subjective morality. Light versus darkness, or as I've been teaching on, pride versus humility. Eve chose darkness. Adam chose darkness. And with every selfish decision we make, you and I still choose darkness to this very day as well. And that is why sin is so serious. Because the whole world suffers the consequences of those selfish decisions. And then we blame God for it. And ask how he could be a loving God and allow those things to take place. Now, it looks like a dark Christmas for many this year as well. And it looks that way because it is. We as Americans live in a very divided nation. We're just one nation in a very divided and dangerous world. All around us we could see political upheaval. We see race riots that take place. We see political extremists. We see all sorts of things that are going on. And that's just the stuff that the media focuses on a daily basis like a broken record. But think of all of the other things that are going on that we don't hear about, of all of those who are actively losing a loved one right now, like my friend did a few years ago. Think of all of the widows that no longer have their spouse to share the holiday with. Think of all of the innocent babies that we slaughter legally in this country through abortion like Herod did 2,000 years ago. Think about all the children that are going to go to bed hungry tonight. Those that are sex slaves in our great human trafficking affliction that we have in our nation, in our world right now. It doesn't matter what Christmas we're talking about. From that very first night that Christ was born until right now, there has always been darkness. But my friends, the point of what I'm saying is do not lose hope with that, because there is still something worth celebrating, and not just on December 25th, but on every single day. This season and what we are celebrating is a season of hope. And there's a reason to get out of bed every morning, because even though we live in this world of darkness that is a result of us being handed the reins of control, God has pierced that darkness with His light known as Jesus Christ, and He has offered us forgiveness and grace that we don't deserve if we will do it His way. There is light in this mess that we call 2023, and that light is Jesus Christ. But here is the question that I pose to all of us this morning. This Christmas, we live in a broken and dark world. Like I said, we already know that. You don't even have to be a Christian to recognize that truth. But as the church, as the hands and feet of Jesus Christ, literally still walking on this planet, what are we going to do about it? How are you and I going to leave this place today and pierce that darkness for others with that light of Christ? Who are we going to extend undeserved grace to? And again, undeserved is undeserved. It means they don't deserve it, just like we didn't deserve it from God. Just like that man's mother didn't deserve it. Who are we going to lend our shoulder for them to cry on? What expecting mother? We complain about things like abortion, but what expecting mother are we going to offer hope to so she doesn't feel like that is her only option? Who are we going to feed that's hungry? Now, yes, like I said, this world is dark, but the controls for the light have been placed into the hands of those who claim Jesus Christ as their Savior. If you would, bow your heads with me and let's close in a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we just want to take this moment